Precisa ferir a pressão, medir a glicemia ou tomar uma vacina? Na Drogasil tem exames, testes e calendário vacinal completo. E o que é melhor, tem sempre uma Drogasil aí perto de você. É fácil, prático e rápido. Dá para ir entre uma música e outra. Procure nossos farmacêuticos. Quanto mais você conhece o que a gente faz na Drogasil, mais você se cuida.
To episode 1 of the brand new, rebranded Eagles Memories podcast, now part of the Pin Pull Network. I'm John Stolnis from BleedingGreenNation.com, and many of you know my voice, I think, from the Eye on the Enemy podcast, which, in addition to this new Eagles Memories podcast that you're listening to right now, is back. You know, formerly with BGN Radio, we are now back on this fine Eagles podcast network, and we're going to be doing some sporadic Eye on the Enemy episodes here in the offseason as we take a look around the NFC and the NFC East, and we'll be doing that on a weekly basis once the season begins. But here during the spring and the summer, we're going to be doing a lot of Eagles Memory podcasts, so I'm very happy to be back and podcasting about the Birds after about a month hiatus. And this summer, I want to specifically take a look back at one of my very favorite Eagles teams of all time, the 2004 Philadelphia Eagles. It is 20 years since that team, and I got to tell you, folks, that makes me feel very old. that was the year I moved from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. So for me to wrap my head around the fact that now I've been here for 2 decades after having lived in the Philadelphia area for my entire life before that is truly mind-bending. But that Eagles season in 2004 was the most dominant run by any Eagles team I had ever seen up to that point in my life. And for those of you who don't know me very well, who haven't listened to me before, I cut my teeth on the Philadelphia Eagles during the Buddy Ryan era. So I don't go back as far as some. I'm sure some of you all go back to the Dick Vermeil era and maybe even the Chuck Bednarik era and even further back than that. Greasy Neal, perhaps, you know, that's more your cup of tea. And on these Eagles Memories podcasts, we will take a deep dive into the Wayback Machine, and we'll bring you some stories from the past. And I hope to have some good guests and some interesting folks on the podcast here over the next few weeks and months and years, and who knows how long we're doing this thing as we explore Eagles history. But for right now, we're going to look back at the 2004 Philadelphia Eagles, and specifically Terrell Owens. This was 20 years ago, the summer of Terrell Owens coming to the Philadelphia Eagles. But let me just kind of set up. So what we're going to do on this episode, to set things up for you, we're going to talk about the acquisition of Terrell Owens and the excitement that the fan base had for this guy. We're not going to get into how it all fell apart, where it started to go wrong. We'll get into that in a couple of weeks as we move through the 2004 Eagles season. But for today, for this episode 1, I just want to focus on the summer of TO. When the vibes were immaculate, when we thought we were ushering in an era of Eagles football where you were going to have McNabb and Owens as the centerpieces for a Super Bowl offense for the next 5 to 7 years after that. Obviously, that didn't happen. But let's set things up here for you. The 2004 Eagles offseason, which is where we are now in terms of the football calendar. We're in the 2024 Eagles offseason. 20 years ago, the Eagles were coming off 3 straight NFC championship game losses. Most of you listening probably remember that was a pretty low ebb. That NFC championship game loss to the Carolina Panthers after the end of the 2003 season was, I think, the worst loss. No, it wasn't the worst loss, because I was at the final game at Veterans Stadium. I was at the Rondé Barber game. That was the worst loss of any Philadelphia sports team I've ever witnessed. But I think we really hit full anger and frustration after the 2003 NFC Championship game against the Carolina Panthers, when the Eagles lost 14-3. And frankly, it was a game, even though the Panthers scored only 14 points, the Eagles were never in that game. Brian Westbrook was injured going into that game. That was a key factor in the reason why they didn't win. And then Donovan McNabb left in the third quarter with an injury, but he was awful and the offense was awful even before he left. Donovan was 10 for 22 for 100 yards on that day with 3 interceptions. Now, it certainly ruled out any possibility of a comeback once Donovan McNabb got hurt and he left, but just doesn't seem like the Eagles were going to win that game anyway. Carolina bullied the Eagles receivers all over the field in that game. And that's where I think, to that point, during Andy Reid's buildup of those early 2000 Eagles teams, he was content with the James Thrashes of the world, Todd Pinkston, Fred Mitchell, Greg Lewis. These are the different receivers that they kept trotting out there year after year. Torrance Small, Charles Johnson, Nay Brown, right? Remember all these different guys that came in and out of the Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver room during those 4 or 5 years. 4 years when the Eagles made the playoffs. Those 4 years under Andy Reid, starting in 2000. They never thought that they needed or wanted to invest in a true number one wide receiver. They picked Freddie Mitchell in the first round of the draft, but it was late in the first round, and he was never regarded as a stud number one wide receiver prospect. And so you had this Eagles offense, which had great running backs, a great offensive line. And I'm sorry, no matter what you think about Donovan McNabb, he was a great quarterback, certainly at the beginning of his career, a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. And they had a mental block in their brains. Their brains were broken in some way that they just refused to give Donovan McNabb a true number one wide receiver. And for most of those regular seasons, the Eagles managed to function exceedingly well without it. I mean, they finished as the number one seed in the conference in 2002 and 2003. Oh, no, they were the second seed in the conference in 2003, but ended up hosting the NFC Championship game because the Panthers beat the Rams in that classic NFC divisional game in 2 overtimes. So the Eagles and 2002. Sorry, so it was 2002 and 2001 and 2002. Oh, heck, I don't remember. Either way, 2002 they were the number one seed. 2003 they were the 2 seed, and the offense, regardless, they put up great records. They kept getting to the NFC Championship game. They kept winning a bunch of games during the regular season. They were the marquee NFC franchise at that point. And they were doing it without a number one wide receiver. And the offense was functioning at a high level most of the time. And that's likely what Andy Reid and at the time Joe Banner likely were thinking is, hey, we don't need to pay a number one wide receiver. We are a West Coast offense. We try to distribute the ball to a bunch of different players. We've got 2 tight ends that we like to use. We've got these 3 running backs, and we've got these receivers. Todd Pinkston can stretch the field. James Thrash is a possession receiver. Freddie Mitchell, Nay Brown. Like I mentioned, all those other guys. Donovan McNabb finds them, and we manage to matriculate the ball down the field, and we score a bunch of points, and they weren't wrong. They weren't wrong. But there would always be those games against good opponents that had good cornerbacks where the Eagles receivers would get totally and completely stymied, 100% shut down. And finally, I believe it was the 2003 NFC Championship game, which actually took place in January of 2004, that finally broke them. When they finally looked around and realized, if we're going to get over the hump, if we are going to get to a Super Bowl, it's going to be on the backs of the offense. It's going to be with Donovan McNabb, and we have got to give him a true game-breaking, difference-making wide receiver. From where they were drafting in the draft, they were not going to be able to get one at the end of the first round. So they had to go out and they had to find one. Because in that NFC Championship game, James Thrash, Todd Pinkston, and Freddie Mitchell got bullied around. Thrash had 1 catch on 6 targets for 9 yards. Pinkston was shut out on 4 targets. Mitchell had 4 catches on 7 targets for 38 yards. They couldn't get open. They desperately needed a star. And they had needed one ever since McNabb became the starting quarterback. But that NFC Championship game against the Panthers seemed to turn the light bulb on for them. And now we enter the summer of Terrell Owens. Now, the Eagles knew they were getting a controversial player, but they also knew they were getting a guy who could do it all. Here, this legend, remember his legendary catch in the wild card game against the Green Bay Packers with Steve Young.
Three-man rush, and Young stumbles on the way back and fires up the middle. Pass is caught by Owens. Owens made the catch. Holy moly.
But it also came with some drama. Who can forget that game in Dallas when Terrell Owens, member of the 49ers, runs out to center the 50-yard line after catching a touchdown pass, stands on the star. Emmitt Smith responds by doing the same. And then Terrell Owens, after a second touchdown catch later in the game, does it and starts a team-wide brawl between the 49ers and the Cowboys. That kind of stuff happened all the time.
Rolling right has the touchdown. Terrell Owens. Where's he going?
Right to the center of the stadium.
Right to the Dallas Cowboys logo. He looks skyward.
I wasn't doing it to taunt anybody. I wasn't directing it at anybody.
I think Emmitt Smith and the Cowboys took it a little differently.
Touchdown! He's going to the center of the field, too, and glances over to the 49ers sideline.
If you wanted to be a battle, it's going to be a battle. Okay, we're at your house. I did it the first time you did it. Okay, well, stop me from doing it again.
And Spellman, I think, was how they got their run defense back on track last week.
Garcia to Owens, touchdown. Owens again heading for midfield. There he goes.
There's going to be a penalty on George Teague because he's going to clock him. Now Teague's going to be kicked out of the game.
Owens, perhaps the best wide receiver in the league heading into the 2004 season, dramatically impacted the team immediately, powering the Eagles to a 13-3 record. And frankly, they lost the last two games of the season. They were 13-1 and had the NFC's top seed all lined up, so they didn't even have to keep playing guys at that point. They could have gone 15-1 that season, the top seed in the NFC, making it all the way to the Super Bowl with Owens turning in a performance for the ages in that Super Bowl, recovering quickly from a broken leg that we thought was going to end his season near the end of the regular season. Now, getting Terrell Owens in Philadelphia was an ordeal, guys. It took, for those of you who don't remember this, the drama, we should have known, given all the drama around Terrell Owens in San Francisco, him trying to force his way out there, and the fact that this took three teams, a mediator. So it took three franchises, the 49ers, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Eagles. It took the Players Union, the league office, and a special master. A special master was appointed to oversee Terrell Owens coming to the Philadelphia Eagles to finally finalize a trade that for much of the beginning of the offseason really did not appear like it was going to be headed in Philadelphia's favor. The Eagles wanted Terrell Owens, but they had to work out a trade with the 49ers in order to do so. It became very clear early on in the process that Owens wanted to come to Philadelphia. Now, we need to back up a little bit more. Why is Owens leaving San Francisco? He had one more year left on his contract, but there was a paperwork malfunction with Owens and more specifically Owens' agent. They didn't file some paperwork on time that would have voided the final year of Owens' contract in San Francisco. So Owens had thought he was going to be a free agent entering the 2004 offseason, but was instead now obligated to play another season with the 49ers. Well, he had had enough of that. Steve Young was no longer the quarterback. It was Jeff Garcia. He and Jeff Garcia didn't see eye to eye, didn't get along with Jeff Garcia. There was a lot of nasty things said by Owens about Garcia. And I think the 49ers had tired of Terrell Owens' act. And so it became clear that Owens was going to force his way out of San Francisco, and that San Francisco really needed to was going to have to work out a trade in order to have Terrell Owens move along. And the 49ers at this point were starting a rebuilding process, so they didn't really need Owens here. But it became clear early on in the process that Owens wanted to try to arrange things so that he would go to Philadelphia. At one point in his playing career, Owens talked to the NFL Network about his early impressions of coming to Philadelphia.
I felt like I had arrived. Like, this is what being a superstar is like. I was living a life of Jerry, but in a different uniform. You know, the adulation, the adoration that the fans, the city had for Jerry, that's how it was in Philly. Probably the first time I really felt at home. I felt like I belonged.
And after Owens' career was over, Reed, and I guess this was, I think, for the A Football Life for Terrell Owens, Andy Reid said that it was pretty obvious that on the field, the McNabb to T.O. connection was going to work out, and it's one of the reasons why they were really, really anxious to try and get Terrell Owens.
He and Donovan had this chemistry that you saw it at the Pro Bowls.
Hey, big players make big plays, baby. Bye.
That helped attract him to Philadelphia.
So Owens and his then agent David Wilson, early on in the process, had worked out a contract deal with the Eagles. They had already agreed to terms on what Owens would make coming to Philadelphia, and that the Eagles would then send a player and a 5th-round pick to San Francisco for Owens. However, San Francisco had an offer on the table from the Ravens in which Baltimore would send them a 2nd-round pick. Now, you could say that if the Eagles found that out, they should have offered a 2nd-round pick too. Like a 5th-round pick is for Owens is stealing. He's absolutely worth a 2nd-round pick, and the Niners made the smarter football decision. Can't blame them, because on March 4th, they accepted the deal with Baltimore. However, Owens was adamant that he wanted to play for the Eagles and refused to report to the Ravens. Upon learning of Owens' strong desire to play in Philadelphia, the union then got on Owens' side and argued that the trade should be rescinded and that the 30-year-old should be declared a free agent. Now, all of this, again, could have been avoided if Owens and his agent hadn't messed up the deadline to void the final years of his deal with San Francisco. But they firmly believed his deal with San Francisco should be null and void, and San Francisco knew that they needed to trade him. So here we have a tricky situation, gang. We have the 49ers have completed a trade with the Baltimore Ravens. This is all happening in March, by the way, right after the Super Bowl. The 49ers have a trade in place with Baltimore for a 2nd-round pick to acquire Terrell Owens. The Eagles have already worked out a contract with Terrell Owens and have agreed to a player and a 5th-round pick to go to San Francisco. Pretty easy to see which deal that San Francisco would want to take. But the Ravens have no contract deal worked out with Owens. Owens doesn't want to talk to them about a contract, and he won't report to Baltimore after the trade has been made. So now Baltimore is saying, okay, so are we going to basically lose a 2nd-round pick for a player who won't play for us? Special Master Stephen Burbank now enters the picture, appointed by the NFL to oversee what now had become a circus. Attorney Jeffrey Kessler presented a more than 2-hour presentation. This is a union attorney to Burbank that was apparently effective enough to scare San Francisco into rethinking their resistance to undoing their deal with Baltimore. So that the Ravens are now sitting here. This union lawyer presents their case to the special master, trying to convince the special master that Owens should be made a free agent. Not to necessarily force the trade to Philadelphia, but that Owens, that the paperwork malfunction was a simple mistake, that it kind of goes against what Owens was owed in terms of being able to become a free agent. He had played the proper amount of time, and that they shouldn't have let just a paperwork snafu prevent Owens from reaching free agency. And it appeared as though to the 49ers that Burbank was convinced by the players union lawyer enough that they thought Owens was going to win his case, that Owens would be declared a free agent. So reading the writing on the wall, and rather than wait for Burbank to make a ruling, the 3 teams agreed to a settlement, a 3-way trade that would see the Eagles send a 5th-round pick to the Ravens and would send Brandon Whiting, a defensive end, to the 49ers in exchange for T.O., going to Philadelphia. So rather than see Owens become a free agent and get nothing, San Francisco got Brandon Whiting, a rotational veteran defensive end who would go on to play a grand total of 5 games for the Niners in 2004, where he recorded no sacks and 11 combined tackles. He then retired after the 2004 season. So to say, essentially, San Francisco didn't get anything for Terrell Owens. There's no doubt here the Baltimore Ravens also got jobbed, but they recognized that the headache they would assume if they forced Owens to abide by the trade and tried to welcome in an unhappy malcontent into their locker room, a reality that would become all too clear for Philadelphia in 1 year's time, was a no-go, was a non-starter. Let's just get the 5th-round pick. After the agreement, Ravens general manager Ozzie Newsome said, "In good faith, we made a trade that was approved by the NFL, and we thought we had a valid contract with T.O. So they did have a contract with T.O. We have our 2nd-round choice back and an extra selection, and we'll use both to improve the 2004 Ravens." Of all these teams, the Ravens came in second best outside of the Eagles, of course. Following the compromise, Owens signed a 7-year, $42 million deal in Philly that included $16 million in bonus money, and it seemed like it was a deal all sides were happy with. At the press conference introducing Owens to Philadelphia, Jeffrey Lurie, Andy Reid, and T.O. all sang a very happy song.
We're very excited to be able to have Terrell Owens right here today.
Like Terrell said about
Terrell.
That's what I meant, Terrell. We'll get this straight right now. It's T.O. He has a passion for the game, and that's something that I like, and I don't mind the personality.
I feel like I'm in a winning organization here, so I just want to add to the puzzle. Maybe I am the missing link. We'll soon see.
As the summer rolled along, Eagles fans worked themselves into a frenzy, anticipating finally, we're going to get to see a legitimate number 1 wide receiver in Andy Reid's offense with McNabb. And let me tell you, the anticipation of seeing Terrell Owens in this Andy Reid offense is it's even greater than A.J. Brown coming to the Eagles a couple of years ago. T.O. at this point was a megastar in the sport, and you're going to put him in an offense that had been to 3 straight NFC championship games? Are you kidding me? With Donovan McNabb, who was at that point a top 5 quarterback in the NFL? So yes, we were working ourselves into a frothy frenzy, folks, anticipating Terrell Owens and waiting for him to get on the field. When training camp opened in Lehigh that summer, tens of thousands of fans turned out, and the national obsession was T.O. ESPN visited Eagles camp early on in the summer. It was one of those stops, and ESPN's Trey Wingo was there.
Eagles camp this year all about Terrell Owens after those 3 straight NFC title game losses. Marriage proposals. Donovan McNabb thinks this is a great idea. 10,000 people strong here, and they're all striking a pose, hoping that Terrell will strike them into the Super Bowl. 10,000 strong, and it's all about one guy, Terrell Owens. You know, when he signed with the Eagles, he corrected head coach Andy Reid on how to say his name. Some would call that a risky move. Clearly, Terrell Owens' career has been about risk almost since the day he got into the NFL.
As part of ESPN's visit, Andrea Kramer sat down with Owens for a one-on-one, and it's so interesting to hear some of what he had to say early on in the process when things were perfect.
Why Philadelphia?
Because I felt like they definitely had something going. I mean, to get to the championship 3 times in a row, that's really kind of unheard of unless you're the Bills to get to Super Bowls. But obviously, the Ravens was one of my choices.
Why not the Ravens?
Because I felt their quarterback situation was in limbo. And it wasn't anything that against the Ravens at all. That's what a lot of people don't understand. They were like, well, why didn't you want to go to Baltimore? They got Ray Lewis. They got this and that. They got Jamal Lewis. I mean, I'm not saying Kyle Bowles is a terrible quarterback, but I wasn't comfortable with that situation.
And it's also fascinating to hear about how he perceived his relationship to be with Donovan McNabb early on, too.
How have you and Donovan started to get accustomed to each other?
I mean, I like Donovan. He's cool.
What do you like about him?
His energy, his personality. Great guy to be around. I mean, I've talked on the phone with Donovan more times than I had with Steve, Jeff, and all the quarterbacks combined in San Fran.
What does that indicate?
It's a good thing. We're going to go together like peanut butter and jelly, ham and cheese.
Cheese steaks. You're in Philly. Cheese steaks.
Ham and cheese steaks.
You know, hearing that last one, perhaps we should have known then that after the ham and cheesesteaks comment that this wasn't going to work out long term. Like, yes, as at the end of the day, it turns out that the McNabb and Owens relationship really did go together, as well as cheese and ham and cheesesteaks. Like, you couldn't have asked for a better metaphor with how it actually all turned out. Now, at the time, Owens felt like he was going to be a star in Philadelphia for a long time.
You know, and this is just the beginning. It shouldn't be really too much pressure on either one of us. We just got to go out there and just play.
How can there not be pressure? People are saying that this is the final piece to the Eagles' Super Bowl title.
We'll soon see. I mean, granted, they can label me as the missing piece, and if I am that missing piece, we'll soon see. If we win the Super Bowl, then it'll be solidified that I was the missing piece.
And looking back, the quotes from T.O. immediately after the deal, they just don't hit quite the same, do they? As the summer rolls along, we are going to continue to take a deeper dive into everything that went wrong, how it all fell apart, egos and money and everything else that submarined what could have been a legendary partnership and multiple Super Bowl appearances with Owens in the fold. But for anyone who remembers the 2004 season as well as I did, it was perhaps the single most exciting offseason of all time. They also signed Javon Curse that offseason as well, getting themselves a dynamic edge rusher, something that they hadn't had since Hugh Douglas. And we all knew Owens was going to be an amazing fit for the 2004 Eagles. It was such a perfect fit. And then it all came crashing down, but we'll get to that later this summer. Next week on Eagles Memories, we'll dive into some of those incredible early season moments when it became clear that T.O. and the 2004 Eagles were going to be like ham and cheesesteaks. No, that's not right. Well, just that it was going to be different than anything we'd ever seen before. So I want to encourage you all to check out everything else we've got going on over here at the Pin Pull Network. You can, of course, follow me at John Stolnis. You can read my work at bleedinggreennation.com. And you can also check out the Phillies podcast that we do, in case most of you know that I do Philly stuff as well. But please check out the Hidden Season Phillies podcast over with WHYY and Billy Penn as we chronicle a historic Phillies season here so far in 2024. But make sure you check back here next week at the Pin Pull Network for episode 2 of Eagles Memories, where we will continue to roll up our sleeves and dive in to the 2004 Eagles season 20 years later. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week right here on Eagles Memories.